Welcome to the Midwest Moguls Show, where we talk all things business, real estate, and entrepreneurship. Let's dive into today's episode and make business enjoyable again. Welcome back to the Midwest Moguls Show. It is Joe and myself in the podcast studio today. We are going over exit strategies on deals. So when you're underwriting things, whether you're keeping it as a rental, whether you're wholesaling it, flipping it, novation, double close, what do we want to talk about? Airbnb, any of these things. We'll dive into that in today's episode, so you guys stay tuned. If you have questions, drop them down below. We'll make more content on, like, basically just more informational content on all these topics. But so if you watch the previous episode, previous podcast, we dove into rehab estimates, calculating all the numbers, so on and so forth. And we alluded to the exit strategy route. So in that one, we specifically went over wholesaling and flipping. Like that was the kind of the main highlight of that episode. Now, and I'm very guilty of this, so I'll be the first to admit it. When I'm running deals on rental properties specifically, and I'm talking about single family rentals or small multifamily 2 to 4 units, I have the habit of just running it as if it's going to be a flip or wholesale. And then if we decide to keep it as a rental, the numbers typically work out.
Right.
So meaning if we're buying the place for 50, 60, 70 cents on the dollar, chances are it's going to cash flow that amount, but we can walk through some example scenarios and stuff to watch out for. But we'll specifically keep this one more towards the rental property route, because I think that might be the most beneficial for everyone. But when we're evaluating an exit strategy, like say we have a property right now in Neenah. So I think purchase price was $137. We have 52 into it. So we went over budget on that side of things, go figure. Or we'll say 60 into it. So we're in for roughly, what is that, like 197? So about $200,000. Now, with most rental properties, to have them cash flow with interest rates where they're at, the 1% rule may or may not get you there. And the 1% rule, what I'm saying is, if the property costs you $200,000, can you rent it out for $2,000 a month? In this case, we cannot. We can rent it for $1,800 a month, but not $200,000 or $2,000. Sorry. So what that means for us is, when we go to refinance it, we're not going to be able to get all of our cash out. And that's something, especially when you're running numbers initially, you need to be careful of this, because if you don't have excess funds or whatever, and we'll get into that again later in this episode, what you might want to have in reserves. But if we were not financially capable of holding it, then it puts us in a position of, shit, we need to sell this at a loss and realize that loss this year instead of holding on to it and then eventually selling it for a higher purchase price. So I guess when you're looking at things initially, Joe, do you factor in, like, hey, worst case scenario, this place doesn't sell, like what happens then? Or what, walk me through the psychology on your side.
Yeah. So the way, like, I look at pretty much every single deal that comes towards me is I run it as if we're going to just fix and flip it. Mainly because that offer price is going to be pretty much the lowest that it ever needs to be in order to buy a property. You know, then when it comes to, wholesaling, novations, buying it as a rental, those numbers, usually the allowable offer can come up.
Correct.
For the numbers still to work. So I always look at it as a fix and flip. But I always look at, basically I go into it also with 2 different like strategies. So flipping it, and then what's the next other strategy to get rid of it if shit hits the fan. And usually that could be, wholesaling it, make a little bit of a profit. Usually that's the best case for how I look at it. And then also just buying it, clean it all out, and then relist it. And list at a higher purchase price.
Of course.
But that's typically how I look at my exit strategies from there. Now, if it's an actual like duplex, I'm going to be looking at it again as if it's a fix and flip. And budget in a profit. Usually the profit's not going to be as much as if it was like a single family, flip, because I'm more looking at it as a potential of holding on to it. And there really doesn't need to be a huge profit for me if I'm holding on to it.
And so what I found over the years is, like, say, because we've bought some duplexes together in the past, then we've sold some and so on and so forth. But with those, like, if you generally speaking, and I always look at what are the lenders refinancing at. And for us currently right now, that's normally 80% of the appraised value as long as it still cash flows.
Correct.
Now, the property I alluded to in the beginning in Nina that we couldn't sell, 80% of that value is, I don't even know. Let me just, I'll calculate that right now. So we got, say it's worth 225 times 0.8. That puts us at 180. Oh, so it's like right on the 1% row. So if we can only refinance out 180 in that particular case, which is all the lender is going to be willing to do, and they establish that amount through an appraisal. They have an appraisal come out. So again, if you guys didn't watch our video on running numbers and everything like that, I would highly recommend it. But they'll do 80% or 75% of that appraised value. Sometimes they'll do more, but it depends on the situation. So if that means we only can do a refinance at 180, we still have $20,000 stuck into this place. So then it's like, well, are we all right with that? Can we financially hold on to it and not worry about the $20,000 for right now? Maybe refinance in the future once interest rates come down. But for me, I'm like, in a worst case scenario, okay, we have $20,000 stuck in. We're renting it out for $1,800 a month. Maybe we're making $200 in profit or whatever the case is. So $2,400 a year divided by that $20,000 that we have stuck into it. It's still a 10% return on investment.
Right.
So I'm like,
that's not bad.
No. And then the property value is going to go up. The mortgage is going to get paid down. You have some tax benefits. So this might sound like justifying that purchase, but again, if you do that across 5 to 10 different properties, you're going to end up broke unless you're making a shit ton of income.
I was going to say.
and that's where I'm like, on our side, we can afford to do maybe 1 or 2 of those a year and have some money stuck into them, but we can't afford to do 5 or 10 because that could sink an entire business. And that's what most people don't understand is you have to have, especially when you're acquiring rentals, you have to have some sort of income coming in.
Yeah.
Because the rentals generally don't flow or push out a lot of cash flow, especially in the beginning, but years down the road, they'll start producing for you. So I guess in any of those scenarios, as long as you do not have to lose money and you can financially stand holding on to it, like even what might seem like a bad deal on the purchase could end up turning out extremely, extremely well for you. And I have another example that I can share with the audience of, we bought a deal in Appleton years ago. And this is like I fucked up on this so bad. So our initial offer to this guy was like $87,000.
Okay.
And I didn't review that prior to going back out there because like, hey, I had the tenants moved out. I did some stuff. We came up to a $127,000 purchase price.
Holy shit.
And I'm like, because I thought we offered him like 116 or 117 initially. And then I was reviewing my numbers and I'm like, what the hell just went on there? So he took the offer, of course. Yeah. Like he it was freaking $40,000 higher than what we initially offered. And I'm like, oh shit, like we're going to lose money. But we decided to keep it as a rental. And we did a rent-to-own sort of situation on that one. But now the property is worth $250,000 and we only owe like 107. So I'm like, for us, that's it's a home run deal. But we held it long enough. We've had that for 4 years or 5 years at this point that I'm like, well, time can kind of eliminate all mistakes as long as you can financially withstand it. So that's kind of my thoughts on there. And then I know we discussed, and I'm just looking at my notes right now. So we discussed worst case scenarios, how much can it rent for? And like say you're initially underwriting a thing. I don't know if you do this on your side or not, but it might be a thing to add. But say you're looking at a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house that's worth $350,000 once it's fixed up. Do you ever look at what something like that can rent for? Or are you just like, does that even come top of mind on your side? Or what are your thoughts there?
I would say typically I don't.
Yep.
But at the same time, if I feel like in my gut that there could be a chance where maybe it doesn't work out, the reselling, like say, I run all my numbers, my max allowable offer is at, X amount. And the seller's basically, not willing to take that and we have to go a little bit over, then I'll kind of basically do my research, see, okay, even if we're going over, we might not be making as much. We could also run into problems. That's when I'll look at what are multiple other exit strategies just in case something, hits the fan
Yeah.
and it just doesn't work out. So then, yes, I will look at, basically prices for, or I guess rents.
Something similar.
Similar to that. So using like Rentometer,
Yeah. Yeah.
or even on Zillow, you can look
Yeah,
up,
they have a ton of
rent.
shit.
So yeah, but not typically, I should
Yeah.
say.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like you look at the deals, and again, underwriting in the beginning, like running your numbers based upon worst case scenario. Like if we only sold this for 280,000 instead of 320,000, will we still break even? Will we still make money? And knowing where your break even point is at, I think is extremely valuable, because like I was talking to Tony from Good Faith Funding, and he said he actually won't buy a property that he doesn't have multiple exit strategies for.
Yeah.
Because he got caught up in when it was the recession and all those things were happening.
Yep.
Like he saw the worst case scenario, and they were able to hold their entire portfolio so that it wasn't affected. But the people who weren't able to hold, kind of what I had mentioned before, that's when they had to sell at an extreme discount or do short sales or foreclose on the properties or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And I think it's depends on the average price point in your area. But the more you can be insulated from the worst case scenario events happening,
right,
I think the safer it is. And real estate flipping and everything like that is a risky business. Like there's no, but the return on investment
is big too.
It's huge. And that's, again, the more risk there is, typically the more reward. So you just have to find where you are comfortable, maybe partner or work with an operator or run some numbers past another individual and just see, okay, where are you coming in at? Here's where my numbers are at. Can you fact check this? Can you look at photos or video or whatever? And if you guys need help with that, just drop a comment down below. More than willing to help out for whatever it's worth. But yeah, that's kind of the main things. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is location.
Yes.
Because location on all of these things is huge.
Yes.
Like if you are planning, I think of Milwaukee, for example. Some of those neighborhoods are strictly rental properties. Like if you put it up to sell it, the chances that a retail buyer is going to buy it and move in are slim to none.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, you have to confirm your numbers beforehand. It's like, what are landlords buying properties at in this neighborhood? Not what are retail buyers buying properties at. What are landlords?
I'm glad you hit on that, because that's a huge thing. Is there are certain areas that, and I actually have a lot of like sellers that ask me like, are you gonna fix and flip this? Are you gonna keep it as a rental? And I tell everybody it's always dependent on the location and the neighborhood that the property's in, because it can really vary. Like you said, certain neighborhoods, majority is just for like rentals, especially if you get close to like, say, college campuses and stuff like that. A lot more basically rentals. Now a lot of people are probably looking to raise a family near,
and
college.
that makes sense. Yeah, exactly.
I don't want my kids going over,
the keg party.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go over there, but tell the kids to go to bed. But it's definitely smart to look at the market that you're buying that property in and see, okay, is everybody else doing rentals, or is this more of a nice neighborhood?
Yeah.
You're not going to want to, basically buy a property and plan on keeping it as a rental if it's a really nice neighborhood where it's just residential living. There's basically no other rental properties. It's probably not the smartest thing.
Yeah.
Not saying you can't do it, but I would look at probably, fixing up and reselling it. That's probably where you're going to make your most money.
Yeah. And like for me, when I go out on appointments with owners, the one question I always ask, I'm like, how are your neighbors? Because I'm genuinely curious, regardless if they live there or not.
Yeah.
They typically know the neighbors. It's like, oh yeah, hey, so-and-so lives here. They've lived there for 15, 20 years or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, perfect. What about the neighbor over there? What about this one? And you can point to the properties when you're there just to get a little bit more of an idea. And then if they mention, it's like, oh, that's a rental. That's another rental. It's like, well, the two houses next door, or if there's houses in the backyard or in the front, like if all of those are rentals, you might want to factor that in and maybe budget for, hey, I'm going to wholesale this one, or I'm going to budget for keeping this as a rental myself, or trying to sell it to another end investor who would keep it as a rental.
Right.
So these are all things that, of course, with experience, you learn, you gain some insight, some knowledge for whatever it's worth. And yeah, it's smart to be well informed prior to going into an appointment. or even while you're there.
Right.
Because you don't always need to give an owner offers on the spot. Like for years, we never did that. And then we would just call them back later in the afternoon or everything after doing a little bit more research. And I would encourage as new investors is try your hardest not to give a number while you're there and be like, hey, give me an hour or two, call them back same day if possible, and just be like, hey, this is where we're at offer wise. Like after doing some research or whatever the case is, because that'll eliminate a lot of the mistakes.
Yeah.
Especially if you're excited about the place right away. And that's like for me, because I typically provide offers while I'm there. But I found if I call them back and let them know, it eliminates a lot of the like, hey, let's get this deal worked out, like chasing that deal versus logically, does this even make sense for us? And it may or may not, but that's for each one of us to establish. But any other thoughts or questions on the exit strategies?
No, I don't think so. I think we kind of hit them all. The biggest thing is, obviously have one exit strategy that you are really good at doing.
Yep. I would agree.
And you're focusing on that for us, fix and flipping, but always have multiple other exit strategies ready to go in your toolkit because you never know what can happen. So always have at least one main exit strategy and a backup if all else fails.
Perfect.
That's my advice.
Well, we'll end it on that. Appreciate you guys watching as always. We will see you in the next one.